Greetings from New York City and Columbia Business School Executive Education. I'm Scott Gardner, and I'm very happy today to be with Professor Patricia Angus for the Enterprising Families, Challenges, Opportunities, and Keys to Success. Before I introduce Professor Angus, I'd like to go over, as always, a few quick logistics. A recording will be made available to you after the webinar. If you'd like to tweet about the webinar, please use our hashtag CBSExecEd. And as always, we encourage you to upload your questions to the Q&A box, and we'll get to as many of those as possible in the last 10 minutes. Thank you. So I'm here today with Professor Patricia Angus. She is the founder and CEO of Angus Advisory Group, LLC, an adjunct professor at Columbia University, and the director of the Family Business Program, along with being recognized in the industry as a thought leader in multi-generational family governance and wealth. She has also launched the Family, Enterprise, and Wealth MBA class, designed and teaches Global Immersion, Nordic Family Enterprise, and Experiential MBA course at Columbia Business School. She has been named one of the top 50 women in wealth management by Wealth Manager, a rising star in private asset management, a finalist for Family Business Advisor of the Year by the Society of Trust and Estate Practitioners, and is consistently named among the top wealth advisors by the UK-based City Wealth. It's so great to be with you today.
Good morning, Scott. Great to be with you, too.
Good. Well, let's get started. There's a wealth of material that we can talk about today. Sure. The first thing I think we should talk about, in general, what is an enterprising family?
What an excellent question. And I am really glad to be here today to speak with you about something that is so close to my heart and so close actually to the heart of the economy and the society that we all live in. One of the most interesting things about families and family enterprise is how important they are in the world. So people watching today, you may not know Scott, but family enterprises constitute three quarters of the world's businesses are family owned and controlled. 60% of the workforce, so 6 out of 10 people working in the world today are working for family enterprise at a minimum, and at least 60 to 70, perhaps as many as 80 to 90% of the global GDP annually is generated by family businesses. Wow. So it's really compelling, and I think it's really important to think about families and the impact they have on society, given that they are integrated into everything we do. But what's in a name? What does enterprising family mean? It's a fairly new name that's being used, and I can say that in the past, people have used a whole number of things to describe families who are at the core of economy and society. Family business, business family, family office, legacy family, dynastic family, family entrepreneurial family, family office, wealthy family. What do all of these things mean? What I'd recommend to anybody watching today is to think for themselves, how do they define themselves as a family, and how do they see themselves as a family? It's very complex. All of these issues that families are working on together, whether it's in their business, in their family, and as we all know, families are evolving today. So you have blended families, you have multiple families working together, you can have husbands and wives working together. Think about your own situation and define who you want to be yourself. So in answer to your question, and that was a long-winded way to get there, we at Columbia consider an enterprising family to be a family that sees itself as dynamic and forward-looking, that looks out for the potential, support, and growth for every member of the family, not just the few. It's really for the many. And in fact, the sum of the parts is greater than the whole. So the contribution of an enterprising family on society is far greater than you would imagine to begin with. So they're really dynamic and forward-looking. It's really not the concept of family business that people had in the past and the stereotypes that went with it.
Right, and I'm fascinated by that fact that 6 out of 10 people work for somehow a family business?
Yeah.
Do you think that people in family business know that's that great? Like, in other words, they could use information sharing and...
Yeah, absolutely. And it's one of the really exciting things about being in the world today. Yeah. I would say probably 150 years ago, it would have been a given that everybody would have understood that family businesses are so important. But there was a development, especially in the United States, post-World War II, where we assumed that the growth of businesses was that they were going to become more independent and that you were going to have professional professional managers who needed to run businesses that were owned by a wide variety of people and really open to the public. But in fact, that hasn't happened. In emerging markets, family businesses are probably 90% of the economy. In the United States, where we probably have the smallest percentage of family businesses, there are still some statistics that show that at least a third to a half of publicly traded companies are in fact family owned and controlled. You just don't think about that. Yeah. And it has an impact on the people who are working for them, because family enterprises have different cultures and different ways that they work together.
That's great. So interesting, because I would have thought the exact opposite, like you said, because families aren't living near each other as much as they used to. So it's a really interesting fact.
Yeah, well, I think especially here in the United States, it's hard to get your head around this. But if you think about Walmart and you think about so many of the largest companies, the Coke industries, every year students in my class write papers about Marriott. I've even written a little story called My Enterprising Family Day. And so I woke up in my building that was owned by a family real estate company. I opened my Bosch refrigerator. I pulled out my Twinings tea. I then went and I got in my BMW with my Michelin tires. And then I decided to put on my Chanel suit. Probably I did that before I got in the car. But you could go through an entire day always interacting with a family business.
Oh, it's so interesting. Great.
Yeah, and I recommend for everybody who is watching this to try to keep track each day of how often you're interacting with a family business and not just your own. It's phenomenal.
That's great. Well, that being said, now that we know the range and the breadth of family business, let's move on to the next. With that, what are some unique challenges and opportunities with family business?
I would say that the most important challenge in a family business, or what we call a family enterprise, more complex, is the perception that it's easy. Very often a family member who comes from a family business, especially the larger ones, especially the well-known ones, especially the ones that are the most important in their community, and we all know in our villages that we come from and the cities we come from which the most important ones are. The outside world thinks you have it easy, but you don't. You have family relationships, you have emotional undercurrents that are going on at all times. You have financial complexity in a way that most of your peers don't. You're not just getting a W-2 from your employer, you may also be a shareholder of the family business. And if you're a shareholder, you have a whole set of other responsibilities, authority, power, and control that is not something that we're all taught, actually. It's one of the reasons we've developed the Family Business Program at Columbia to deal with the fact that there aren't many places where family members can go to understand what it means to be an enterprising family, what it means to be an owner, what it means to have investments, what it means to run philanthropy. I didn't even mention the magnitude of philanthropy in the world that's dominated by family businesses. I recently read a statistic that 81% of family businesses have family philanthropy. Most of the world's philanthropy, you don't have to go far in the United States without thinking about the Rockefeller Foundation, the Ford Foundation, the Carnegie Corporation, things that were founded over 100 years ago that are still having an impact on society today. And you have to always remember that there's a family behind that. How they operate with each other is going to impact each level. And the evolution of the family enterprise is one of its great challenges. So you have an entrepreneur, and we all love entrepreneurs, and entrepreneurialism is on the rise, which is very exciting. The entrepreneur, say, for example, in India, comes up with a textile company, and it does well. Husband and wife create the textile company in their building that they are renting. They then realize they've made enough money to buy the building, so they buy the building. Then they realize that the building has a little extra space, so they rent it out to somebody else. Once they rent it out, they have a little bit of extra income, and they have investments. Once you have investments, then you get to the point of how are we going to manage that? Maybe you create a family office, and then you probably have some charitable work you're doing, and you want to organize it. So, Scott, it's incredible the spectrum that a family goes from. We look at the family business as the deli on the corner, the dry cleaner, but in fact, it's mom and pop.
It's not that.
It's not just
range.
that.
It's not just that.
It's a range. It's everywhere.
Yeah.
In fact, it's sort of the misperception about family businesses is that it's very similar to the way people think of women in the economy, right? For a long time, people have said women are a niche market. Women are 50%, if not more, of the population.
Yes, absolutely.
So it can't be a niche.
Right.
Family businesses, which are 3/4 approximately of the economy, it's not a niche. The challenge is that people think it's easy. The challenge is people think that it's just mom and pop. And in fact, family members need different skills. and what they need is skills as owners. They need to understand how to read financial statements, even though they are trained in another area. They need to understand how to communicate with each other in ways that perhaps other families who don't have a business together don't need to. I'd say any family who shares an asset, who shares a home. I share a home with my family that we inherited from our parents. It's a tiny little A-frame in the middle of Vermont. And I tell you, that can be really complicated work to figure out who's using what weekend. You magnify that out to the businesses, it's really interesting. But one of the things that's been learned, and the studies are showing that in family businesses, the leaders are really important, and the CEO is important. And often a family really believes strongly they should have their next generation become the CEO. Well, I can tell you that we have some research showing that a family member is not always the most successful and doesn't always create the greatest performance for the family as a business. It also shows that non-family members who become CEOs, who are aligned with the family's values, tend to do better in the family as a successful family business than those who don't have an alignment of values. So those are some of the challenges. I'm an optimistic person. And one time in class, I was going through all of these challenges, Scott, and the student in the back of the class raised her hand and she said, "Come on, professor, it's not that bad, is it?" And then I flipped to my next slide and I had a big sunrise. She didn't know it was there. And there's some amazing opportunities working together as a family. You can learn together in ways that you just don't have the opportunity to do. You can come together in family governance. It's been shown through studies that family governance is a way to succeed in your family and your business better. What does that mean? It's as simple as having a family meeting. You can have a family meeting and discuss your issues of common concern. Ideally, what you do is then think about what's your common purpose and your common goals, as opposed to focusing on what does not hold you together. What I've worked with families since 1993, and the amazing opportunities that they've had to deepen their relationships with each other, have a greater impact by putting some time into it and learning about it. Their legacy is really what comes out of it. It's known in the field that families don't just define success by finance and by successes in their business. It's more than that. It's called socio-emotional wealth, and there's a whole body of research around that. Socio-emotional wealth.
Right. Yeah, I like that phrase.
Exactly. It's really an interesting way of thinking about it. And it turns business schools on their head a little bit, because in the past, the definition of success for a business would have been the financial success of the business.
Right.
But when you have a family business in context, you're really looking at other aspects. Is the family thriving? Is the community thriving? Is society thriving?
And I think it would be easier to bring someone outside the family in if you've thought about the emotional part, the value system.
You have to. You have to.
Because otherwise you're
spend
just
time
hiring for
thinking about
skills.
it. Skills are never enough in a family business.
They're not in any business, right? But certainly not in a family business.
Well, and that's what's fascinating about family business is really some of the best practices and some of the most important research and learnings is applicable all across the board.
Right.
It's really, and I think if you think about the next generation, the demographics, the millennials who are more drawn to values-driven work, whether they're thinking about investing in a certain way through impact, if they're thinking about a corporation having more than just a financial success, families were way ahead of the curve on that.
Right.
Often they were doing the kinds of things that are now trendy forever.
Right. Great. Let's go through keep going through the list, because I know we have a few more things we want to get to.
I think one of the other opportunities to think in the long term. And I would say that families that are doing this well together and that are thinking well together have a horizon far beyond the people in the room that day. And if you've inherited from your family, whatever the business is or whatever the enterprise is, you have a sense of obligation to the past. But I would say when you think about enterprising families, you also have an obligation and an opportunity to impact the future.
Right.
Not just of your family, but of the society around it.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So,
it seems like equal parts challenges to equal parts opportunities, but you have to.
Well, I'm a little optimistic.
You're more optimistic?
Opportunities than challenges.
Good. Good.
If you put some time into it and you think about it. Absolutely.
Right. So that's kind of overview of opportunities, challenges. There's a lot of positivity there, and there's enormous implications. So I guess our next question would be, who should lead different parts of an enterprising family?
Many people. It's really interesting. When people think about leadership, I think of the last scene in Casablanca. You know the scene, round up the usual suspects.
Yes.
And for too long, when we think of leadership, the usual suspect or suspects have been the CEO and perhaps the patriarch, perhaps the matriarch. In fact, what we believe here at Columbia is that no enterprising family has just one leader. It's just impossible. You have multiple leaders. You have leaders of the family. You have leaders of the family office. You have leaders of the trust structures that the family might own. You have leaders of the emotional side. You have leaders of the financial side.
Right.
And one of the things that's been missed by families is this concept that everybody in the family has skills to offer. I think in the past, you know, the old way of thinking about family business, it was a different time frame back then. Mm-hmm. You had, for example, the one entrepreneur who built up the business and took perhaps a generation to get it to the point where they would then hand it over to the next generation.
Right.
And then they would retire and probably not live for too long after that. Right. But today, people are living longer, and younger generations are getting involved alongside their family and working together longer. So it's a different kind of leadership, both within the business and within the family. I think it's exciting. The most exciting thing that I hear these days are the students who come to class and talk about how they're interacting with their parents, how they're interacting with their aunts and uncles. It's a bit more horizontal, but it's also each generation is learning from the other. Mm-hmm. And the most successful enterprising families have this sense of multiple forms of leadership and multiple leaders. What does it mean to be a leader in a family enterprise? Well, I just spent some time working with a family recently, and we've delineated the different ways that you can be a leader within their family and the different forms of leadership that are appropriate in each area. I would say in general the trend is towards a more collaborative way mm-hmm. of approaching leadership. Mm-hmm. Anybody who has tried to tell people where to go, even if it's as simple as go to a restaurant in a family where you have different Opinions. Right. Just imagine what it's like to then say, this is where we're going to go with the business or where we're going to go with the philanthropy. Right. If you don't have input, it will be very hard to lead the family. It will be very hard for the family to succeed. So I would think very carefully about what your sense of leadership is as a person in your family and recognize you're probably leading more than you realize. So don't just focus on one leader in the family. Stay attuned to the generational shifts, what they are expecting. Aligning, as I said before, with the family values. I would say that a family leader, just as a non-family CEO who is not in sync with and doesn't understand the family's values and what they want to stand for in the world, will have a very hard time keeping that family together. Right. I've also found that if there's a family leader who believes that the success of the financial aspect of the business is the only the only metric, as we like to talk about in business school, that matters, that family will probably not succeed over time, nor will its business. So it's really interesting to think about that.
You know, it's interesting because I would think that when I've been looking at this, the cultural shift section is that in the last 30, 40 years, the idea of gender.
Yes.
As far as like this sort of like, well, this is passed on to this one and this one and this one has just changed enormously and changed the game.
Absolutely. It's changed the game. And we would like to think that in certain cultures the gender question has been resolved, but not necessarily. Right. Many of our students come from other cultures where it is assumed that only the men will be in the business. But now, for example, China, it's a major issue in China right now when you have a very small population inheriting businesses, inheriting the family enterprise over time. The families, going back to being an enterprising family, you have to seize on the potential and the development of each family member, male or female, given the cultural context. Right. There are ways to communicate across cultures to understand how to pull that together.
That's great. All right, and now next is a very important question, I'm sure a question that many people have out there right now, which is, what can you do right now?
Right. Well, there is a quote on the slide. A journey of 1,000 miles begins with one step.
Absolutely. Timeless quote.
Exactly. And the quote on the one before, which was govern a family as you would cook a small fish, which was brought to me by one of my clients many years ago. Be gentle in what you're doing. What you can do today, after you turn off this webinar, before you go back to the rest of your life, ask yourself the question, where are you in your family? Where is your family in the world? How do you define success? What are you doing well together? And what could you do better? What would you like to do better? That's a lot of questions,
Right.
but I would say the bottom line answer to it is reflect. It's never too late to start with a family enterprise, to think more in a more enterprising way, and it's never too early.
Yeah, absolutely. And, you know, the question, we've got a bunch of questions that have been coming in,
Sure.
so I want to get to those in our last perfect timing, last 10 minutes.
Yeah.
This is a question I've been thinking about this whole time. When you talk about the family, when you talk about passing it along to generation, using everybody's talents, you know, to me, again, I think that crosses into running any business,
Sure.
frankly.
Yep.
But also, this question came in from Aaron. It's, what if a family member has no interest in the family business, the family enterprise? Why do they need to learn anything?
That's a very good question. Why do they need to learn anything? Because a family is about more than just the business, and it's more than just the actions that it's taking. There's an emotional connection that you will always have as a family member that deserves exploration when there is something as important as a business that's involved. Because even if you don't want to work in the business, chances are you might inherit some shares in that business. If it's successful, you may become an owner of that business. And just as you wouldn't buy a house without doing due diligence on it, you would probably have an engineer's inspection.
Right.
It's just as important as a family member to do some research on what it is that you actually own and how you relate to these people.
Right.
In fact, in family systems theory, which I am very intrigued with the application of systems theory to families, they say that family members who leave the family are in fact more connected to the family than those who stay.
Interesting.
So if you think it's as easy as leaving the business, it never is in a family situation.
Do you find that those family members who may not want to be involved with the family enterprise, the family business, then when something negative happens in the business or enterprise, that they're sort of at a loss at that moment? Like they can't explain, because if their financial maybe health was even though they had no interest, I would think that just knowing it is to know where your money is and to know
Well,
where,
absolutely.
You know.
If you have a financial interest in it, you owe it to yourself to know about it.
Right.
If you have an emotional connection, if you choose to leave the family, it's a perfectly legitimate decision, but exploring it is really important for you. And I think it's been a misperception in the past that you don't have to understand the business if you are not in it. And in fact, the executive education program we've designed is for all family members, whether they are shareholders, managers, or just family, because it will impact you one way or another. One of the misperceptions in the past, too, which may be underneath that question, is the idea that just because you're family, it means you must go into the business.
Right.
And I would say that the trend today, even in cultures that are more patriarchal and more likely to follow a traditional cultural path, are understanding it may not be in the business's best interest or in the family member's best interest to do that.
Right.
So if you get back to that definition of an enterprising family as enhancing the potential of each family member, it's liberating. I would never say that you have to go into the business, but I would say you have to understand it.
You have to understand it. And I would think, you know, just because we're using, I think it's a better term, family enterprise, because it's such a breadth of what you can do.
Yeah.
So you're not just maybe siloed into this, you know, if you are someone who's philanthropic and not necessarily on the business side, even though I think that's still business, but you have that opportunity because it's an enterprise that's larger than just let's make money, and
It always is. And what you're really getting at, too, is another demographic shift where it used to take a generation to build up the business. Now you may have, within 5 years, success in the business. You may have serious philanthropic work to do. And you may have a family member who is so excited and very skilled in that area that has the potential to contribute, not just to the family, but for themselves, to live out their potential, I think, in that way.
Exactly.
So,
and a great representation then of the enterprise.
Yeah.
You know, because we still have a brand.
Yeah, No, and it can feel crushing. I mean, I wrote an article maybe 10 years ago about the individual in a family enterprise, and in a way, they are the lost souls within sometimes, because the power of the group and the overwhelming nature of obligation can be quite intense, and it'd be quite intense to assume that you have to go into the business. So no, I wouldn't say you have to go into the business, but you have to understand your situation.
All right. This is from Lauren, very, very specific question. I'm drowning in complexity, help. Where do I start? I want to have a life, but spend my time in trust, investment, and board meetings.
This is the story of so many people, especially in their 20s. And it is one of the reasons I do what I do. I am really driven to help people get through complexity. It is complex. I would say, that old line, don't do this at home. To try to do it on your own is just too much.
Right.
To try to get the right help outside, to learn how to find the right advisors who understand your situation and can distill down the complexity and not create more.
Right.
So I practiced law for a very long period of time, and I enjoyed it, but I was concerned that what I was creating for people was more complex than they could handle. And I really enjoy now, I call lawyers my new business development team, because they create the complexity, and I like trying to create some of the ways to manage it that are more healthy for people. And I think that it's incumbent upon the lawyers and the accountants and the investment advisors to not create too much complexity for families, but to recognize that you will have complexity and figure out who you can get to help you with it. And learn what you need to learn to get over the hurdles.
Exactly. And so what would be maybe one or two or three things that you would say immediately when they're searching for this assistance, this help, that you need to ask that person, or questions you should ask yourself when you're meeting? Like what are some red flags, basically?
Yeah, well, there's two things. One is what's the general education you should get, and the other is what is the specific to your family.
Okay.
So the general education, we've created the MBA program around the notion that all graduate students should learn about this, because they will all inevitably work for, work in, contribute to, own, manage, or advise family enterprises. So even if you're in private equity, you're going to be working with family enterprises. You just are. What do you need to do in your education? Absolutely take a class in family business. And I'm not saying that just because we offer them at Columbia. I think everybody should be exposed to the ideas. Come to a general program with your family members. That's the general education, to get everybody speaking the same language, understanding the same concepts, and being exposed to the same theoretical frameworks. When you're looking for a consultant, it's a whole different area, and that's something that you have to think about specifically. What's unique about your family, and what are you looking for? What's unique about you in it? If you have trusts, if you have holding structures, you want to have somebody who's familiar with that and can distill it down for you. If you have a cultural issue that you think somebody from another culture won't understand, you have to make sure you have the right cultural fit with whoever that consultant is. You want somebody with experience, and you want somebody with, I would say, a pretty high level of technical training in some discipline.
Okay, great. And I think that helps to know, when you're going to those few values that you have, it's not just the tangible things. Oh, I need to know this tangible. That's obvious and sort of easy to jot down, but those value systems, I think, for me, would help me find someone I'd want to work with on that.
In the days when I was primarily consulting, I really found that the person looking for help needs to start with themselves first, to figure out who they are and what their greatest strengths are and what their greatest weaknesses are. You can never find somebody outside your family to solve your problems better than you can yourself with outside help. It's a very different way of thinking about it.
Yes, absolutely. All right, we have a couple minutes left. I have one more question here from Derwin. I'm the only one family member working in the business, but what do I do about the others who aren't involved but still expect to receive dividends?
Oh, Derwin, I hear your pain. They need to get educated. Any shareholder who is relying on a family member to support them with dividends needs to understand what you do, what your strategic thinking is, how you're making decisions in the business, how you're spending your day even, and also what it means for them to be owners. The dialogue between owners and management in the past, honestly, it was silence may be the best way of describing the way decisions were made. Today, I would say keeping the dialogue open and understanding expectations, both of the owners and the managers. So, and getting together, have a family meeting to start.
Yeah. Well, it sounds like, I would say in our remaining moments, one of the key themes I'm hearing is communication. And families struggle with that in every sense of the word, but add on a business now. I'm still in shock about how many family businesses there are. So this is a
Yeah.
very important, to them. But communication is key.
Communication is key, and you need to learn some skills in terms of communication. You need to learn how to be accountable to each other. You need to learn emotionally what's going on, but then you also need to know enough about the business to be able to oversee it and to live from it.
Right.
Yeah.
And I know that you have, I think starts November 29th,
Yeah.
right, here at Columbia Business School Executive Education. You have Enterprising Families Learning and Leading Together. So this would be a tangible place that these people could come up and learn about.
And it was
this.
designed, honestly, for all of the people who've called in or I guess texted in with their questions. It's designed for the manager to bring a family member who the manager wants to make sure better understands what's going on in the business. And it's for the family member shareholder who wants to understand how to oversee the business better. And it's also for the family member who's impacted on this.
Great.
Absolutely. And that's our goal, is to help people.
Wonderful.
It's not easy stuff.
Well, Patricia, it was so wonderful to work with you today.
Great.
And I think this was a lot of really important information. We'd like to thank all of you for joining us. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Scott.
Thank you.